They told me I was worthless because I was born without cursed energy. In a world where power meant everything, where your bloodline determined your worth, where magical abilities decided who lived and who died, I had nothing. Zero. Absolutely nothing. And you know what I did with that nothing? I turned it into everything. See, most people think limitations are walls that stop them from moving forward. They see what they don't have, what they weren't born with, what they can't do, and they use it as an excuse to quit before they even start. But limitations aren't walls, they're just starting points. When the Zenin clan threw me out like garbage, when they decided I wasn't worth the space I occupied, when they made it clear that someone like me had no place in their world of power and privilege, I could have accepted that narrative. I could have believed them. I could have spent my life bitter and broken, complaining about the unfairness of being born different, of not having what others had handed to them. Instead, I decided to prove that their entire system was wrong, that raw skill, relentless training, and strategic thinking could overcome any natural advantage, that someone with nothing could become stronger than those who had everything. Your limitations aren't your destiny, they're your motivation. Your limitations aren't your destiny, they're your motivation. But here's what most people don't understand about crushing limitations. It's not about ignoring them or pretending they don't exist. It's about studying them so thoroughly that you find ways to work around them, through them, or turn them into advantages. When I couldn't rely on cursed energy like everyone else, I had to become an expert in everything else. Physical conditioning, weapon mastery, tactical analysis, reading people's weaknesses. While they were depending on their inherited powers, I was building skills that couldn't be taken away. You see, people with natural advantages often become lazy. They rely on what they were given instead of developing what they could earn. But when you start with nothing, when you have no choice but to build everything from scratch, you develop something they never will. Unshakable competence. That's the hidden advantage of disadvantage. When you're forced to work harder, think smarter, and push further than everyone around you, just to survive, you develop capabilities that can't be matched by those who never had to struggle. Your financial background, your education level, your connections, your natural talents. These are just your starting conditions. They're not your final results. I've seen people born with everything, wasted through complacency. I've seen people born with nothing, build empires through relentless effort. The difference wasn't their circumstances. It was their response to those circumstances. Stop using your limitations as excuses and start using them as fuel. Stop using your limitations as excuses and start using them as fuel. Let me be clear about something. Crushing limitations isn't about destroying yourself in the process. That's not strength, that's stupidity. Real strength is strategic. It's sustainable. It's about building capabilities that last, not burning yourself out in a blaze of misguided effort. When I trained my body to compensate for having no cursed energy, I didn't just work harder, I worked smarter. I studied anatomy to understand optimal muscle development. I analyzed combat patterns to predict enemy movements. I learned to use weapons that multiplied my natural abilities. This is the difference between productive struggle and pointless suffering. Productive struggle has a purpose, a system, a clear path from where you are to where you want to be. It builds you up systematically, addressing specific weaknesses with targeted solutions. Most people confuse the two. They think crushing limitations means punishing themselves, pushing through pain without purpose, or adopting some kind of warrior mentality that ignores basic human needs. That's not what I did. I was methodical. Every training session had a goal. Every improvement built on the previous one. Every skill I developed served a specific function in my overall strategy. You need to approach your limitations the same way. Identify them clearly, understand why they exist, then create a systematic plan to either overcome them or find ways to succeed despite them. This isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming the strongest version of who you already are. This isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming the strongest version of who you already are. Most people make the mistake of comparing themselves to others who had different starting points. They see someone with natural talent, inherited wealth, or better opportunities and think, if only I had what they have, then I could succeed. That's backwards thinking. You're not competing against their advantages. You're building from your reality. When I faced sorcerers with incredible curse techniques, I didn't waste time wishing I had their abilities. I studied their weaknesses. I found the gaps in their defenses. I developed strategies that turn their strengths against them. That's the mindset shift that changes everything. Instead of focusing on what you lack, focus on what you can control. Instead of envying others' advantages, develop advantages they don't have. Your limitations force you to be creative. They make you resourceful. They teach you to find solutions others never have to consider. That's not a weakness. That's a tactical advantage. The person who's never had to struggle doesn't know how to adapt when things go wrong. The person who's never been told no doesn't know how to find alternative paths. The person who's always had support doesn't know how to rely on their own strength. But you do. Your limitations have been training you for challenges that would break people who've had it easier. The question isn't whether you can overcome your limitations. The question is whether you'll use the skills those limitations taught you to build something others can't. The question isn't whether you can overcome your limitations. The question is whether you'll use the skills those limitations taught you to build something others can't. But here's where most people get it wrong. They think strength is about eliminating all weaknesses. That's impossible, and it's not even desirable. Real strength is about maximizing your advantages while managing your weaknesses intelligently. I never tried to develop cursed energy because I couldn't. Instead, I pushed my physical capabilities to their absolute peak. I became so proficient with weapons that I could take down opponents who had supernatural abilities. I learned to read situations so well that I could predict and counter techniques I'd never seen before. This is strategic thinking. You don't waste time trying to become something you're not. You become exceptionally good at what you can control. If you're not naturally charismatic, don't waste years trying to become a people person. Become exceptionally skilled at something valuable, and let your competence speak for itself. If you don't have formal education, don't spend decades trying to catch up on credentials. Develop practical skills that produce measurable results. The market doesn't care about your backstory. It cares about what you can deliver. Employers don't hire your potential. They hire your capabilities. Clients don't pay for your struggles. They pay for your solutions. Focus on building capabilities that matter. Skills that solve problems. Knowledge that creates value. Strength that serves a purpose. Stop trying to fix everything wrong with you and start maximizing everything right with you. Stop trying to fix everything wrong with you and start maximizing everything right with you. But let me tell you something about the process of getting stronger. It's not linear, and it's not always visible to others. There will be long periods where you're building capabilities that nobody notices, developing skills that don't show immediate results. When I was developing my physical conditioning, when I was learning to read combat situations, when I was mastering weapons nobody else bothered with, none of that looked impressive from the outside. People saw someone without cursed energy struggling to keep up. They didn't see the systematic development happening beneath the surface. They didn't understand that every session was building towards something larger. They couldn't recognize the strategic thinking behind choices that seemed desperate or foolish. This is the reality of real improvement. It happens in private. It compounds slowly, and it often looks like failure to people who don't understand the process. Your limitations force you into this kind of deep work. While others are coasting on natural advantages, you're developing fundamental skills. While they're getting quick wins through inherited benefits, you're building lasting capabilities. The payoff isn't immediate, but it's permanent. What you build through overcoming limitations can't be taken away, can't be outdated, and can't be replicated by someone who never had to develop it. This is why limitation-driven strength is often more reliable than advantage-driven success. It's built on solid foundations, rather than favorable circumstances. This is why limitation-driven strength is often more reliable than advantage-driven success. It's built on solid foundations, rather than favorable circumstances. Let me tell you something about the people who underestimate you because of your limitations. They're doing you a favor. Every person who writes you off, every opportunity that gets handed to someone else, every door that closes because you don't fit their criteria, that's valuable information. It shows you exactly who and what you can't rely on. It forces you to develop independence. It teaches you to create your own opportunities, instead of waiting for someone else to give them to you. When the Zenin clan rejected me, they thought they were ending my story. What they actually did was free me from their system, their rules, their limitations on what someone like me could achieve. They forced me to prove that their entire hierarchy was built on false assumptions. Your rejections are doing the same thing. They're showing you that the conventional path isn't available to you, so you need to build an unconventional one. They're pushing you toward solutions that others never have to consider. The person who gets everything handed to them never learns to create value independently. The person who's always accepted never develops the resilience to handle rejection. The person who fits perfectly into existing systems never learns to build new ones. But you're learning all of these skills by necessity. Your limitations are turning you into someone who can succeed in ways others can't even imagine. Don't curse the doors that close. Use them to build your own entrance. Don't curse the doors that close. Use them to build your own entrance. But here's something crucial about crushing limitations. You have to be honest about what's actually limiting you versus what you're using as an excuse. Real limitations require strategic solutions. Imaginary limitations just require courage. I couldn't develop cursed energy. That was a real limitation that required real adaptations. Enhanced physical training, weapon mastery, tactical intelligence. But if I had convinced myself I was also too weak, too stupid, or too unlucky to succeed, those would have been false limitations that only existed in my mind. Most people mix these together. They take one or two genuine constraints and use them to justify a whole list of assumed impossibilities. They let real challenges become excuses for imaginary helplessness. Be precise about this. What exactly can't you do? What specifically is preventing progress? What concrete obstacles need concrete solutions? If you don't have formal education, that's a real constraint that requires learning skills through other methods. If you think you're not smart enough, that's probably a false limitation that needs to be challenged through action. If you don't have financial resources, that's a real constraint that requires creative approaches to building value. If you think you're unlucky, that's a false limitation that's preventing you from seeing opportunities. The way you handle real limitations is through strategic adaptation. The way you handle false limitations is by testing them through direct action. Stop mixing the two. Address what's actually limiting you and ignore what you're just telling yourself. Stop mixing the two. Address what's actually limiting you and ignore what you're just telling yourself. Now here's the part most people don't want to hear. Crushing limitations requires you to get comfortable with being misunderstood. When you're building strength through unconventional methods, when you're succeeding despite disadvantages, when you're proving that the system's assumptions are wrong, people won't get it. They'll see you working harder than everyone else and call it desperation. They'll see you taking risks others won't take and call it reckless. They'll see you succeeding without their advantages and call it luck. Let them. Their understanding isn't required for your progress. When I started taking down sorcerers who were supposed to be stronger than me, when I proved that someone without cursed energy could compete at the highest levels, the explanations people came up with were fascinating. Anything except acknowledging that their entire framework for measuring strength was flawed. This is human nature. People would rather protect their worldview than acknowledge evidence that challenges it. They'd rather dismiss your success than question their assumptions about what's possible. This means you're going to be lonely sometimes. You're going to make decisions that make sense to you but seem crazy to others. You're going to pursue goals that others think are impossible or pointless. That isolation isn't a bug, it's a feature. It keeps you focused on results rather than opinions. It forces you to trust your own judgment rather than seeking validation from people who don't understand your situation. The strength you build in that space, away from other people's expectations and limitations, that's the strength that can't be shaken.